Bom dia a todos que nos
Good morning, everyone that are here at this side event of the 40th session of the UN Human Rights Council. This event is happening through the Order of Attorneys in Brazil and the Arns Commission for Human Rights, the Arns Commission. I'm Laura Greenhalgh, a journalist and executive director of the Arns Commission, and I'm going to be the mediator of this event. What reunites us today here is already expressed in the event's title, which is The Erosion of Freedom of Expression in Brazil. We are on live transmission on the OAB YouTube channel and on the Facebook pages of OAB and Arts Commission. Since this is an international event on the program of the UN, it is going to be transmitted with simultaneous translation in English, but it will also be available in Portuguese soon. That said, I'd like to pass the floor to the president of OAB for him to open this event, please. Thank you so much, Laura. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I shall start the debate today by saluting my dear friend and Minister of Justice at the time when being a Minister of Justice was really uh, when it had a really correlation between justice and the officer, which is José Carlos Dias, president of the Arns Commission, and one of the promoters, alongside the Order of Attorneys of Brazil, of this side event to the 40th session of the UN Human Rights Council. I thank and salute Mrs. Irene Khan, Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression at the United Nations, who could not come due to her agenda. And I would like to especially thank our guests of this morning, Patrícia Campos Mello, this brilliant journalist who has been contributing to the Brazilian journalism in these difficult times, Laura Greenhalgh, which is a journalist and also a very important political articulator, and also my friend Pierpaolo Bottini, one of the best criminal lawyers in our country, who has been granted the Order of Attorneys. His talent and his dynamic by observing the freedom of expression in the country. And I'd like to also salute especially Felipe Neto, who was transformed in a social influencer, but also in a political activist for freedom in Brazil, and also the political and literary brilliantism of Paulo Coelho, who is transforming this event into a special event. The Order of Attorneys of Brazil, which I have the honor to represent here, is the entity that gathers more than 1,200,000 male and female lawyers in Brazil, and which has the mission of defending human rights and social justice established in our Constitution. The human rights, in order to fulfill this constitutional duty, the Order of Attorneys of Brazil is here today. Rui Barbosa, a Brazilian jurist and journalist, once said, "Words upset arbitrary states because words are the irresistible instrument of conquering freedom. Let it be free, wherever it may be, and despotism will be dead." Because today, words and freedom are under attack in Brazil. This fundamental right that was achieved after so much fighting is being threatened. The constant intimidation of press professionals, especially female journalists, the threat against those that think differently or are political opponents of the current government, the criminal persecution by the state of indigenous leaderships and social movements activists, and the censorship of scientists raise a red flag for attentive Brazilians. Here today with this debate, and from the testimonies of our guests, we call out the world's attention to this serious threat. This is a space of denouncement, but also of commitment. We will not allow arbitrariness to supplant freedom. We will not allow darkness to prevent the coming of light. And we will not allow obscurantism to undermine our ways. So at last, we are here following the words of the great Brazilian writer Guimarães Rosa. What life wants from us is courage. Let's continue firmly and with courage in all spaces to prevent silence from taking us over. Thank you so much, everyone. I wish everyone a great debate. I pass the floor to the president and founder of Arns Commission, José Carlos Dias, former Minister of Justice. I like to say that I'm very emotional of participating in this event. My dear President Felipe Santa Cruz, who is here today, representing the lawyers and also the great absent father who was my client. The extraordinary figure of Paulo Coelho is the first opportunity that I have to look at your face. I have already read all of your books, but I have the opportunity to look at your face and make a statement of respect and love for everything that you have been doing to Brazil. Pierpaolo Bottini, you were a big boy and you were already brilliant as a lawyer. And you did it all right. And now you're one of the greatest lawyers in Brazil. Felipe Neto, I have the uttermost respect to you and like to honor you as well. Patrícia, you're the muse of freedom of expression in Brazil. And I like to say and like to share my happiness of participating alongside you in this event. My dear Laura, who shines so much in the Arns Commission. We are here today because we have been falling. Brazil has been falling. This is the painful feeling that I have. I'm a lawyer for more than 50 years. And for more than 50 years, I've been living and I've been fighting for democracy. However, during the military dictatorship, when I was a lawyer of more than 500 political persecuted people, I felt in my hands the need to fight for democracy, and we did it. Today, my biggest fear is that we are going to go back, we are going to retrocede. My participation at the National Truth Commission wanted to demonstrate what I want the young people to see, that there was a dictatorship and we must not let it repeat. My fear is that this dictatorship repeats again. We need to hold on and fight against. We need to use our voices in order for this not to repeat itself. The forests that are dying, the indigenous people who are being persecuted, the journalists that are silenced, the students that don't have access to a dignified education anymore. All of these shows that we are really suffering a very difficult moment. And also, more than ever, we are obligated to a duty with democracy, to freedom. These must be our motto. These must be the reason for us to get together. because this justifies our presence here today. Paulo Coelho in Switzerland, Pedro Paulo, I don't know where he is. Patricia, I also don't know, but we are all here as a miracle of technology together in this gallery of voices fighting for democracy and freedom. May God help us and bless us. We were born as the professionals that we are in order to fight for freedom. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And other people are not here because they were killed. They are not here because they were silent. So, this is the time to say enough, enough. We don't want we don't want to we have the obligation, the moral obligation to ourselves, to our children, to our grandchildren, and to our fathers to state that democracy is the only solution to this to the situation that we have to fight for freedom and freedom of expression, a free press. That's what we need. This is the great weapon that we have to fight against this very painful moment that Brazil is living. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, President José Carlos. So I repeat, this debate is going to be in Portuguese on our social networks. At the moment, it is being translated live since it's a UN event. So I'd like to say to you that the organization of Reporters Without Borders has released a recent report pointing out that more than 30 state leaders are against freedom of expression. The Brazilian president, José Bolsonaro, is within this group alongside some tyrants and dictators. This study situates Brazil in the red zone of countries that restrict freedom of expression and reinforces some data that was already gathered by the Brazilian Association of Radio and Television Broadcasters. There were hundreds of cases of acts against freedom of expression. 68 journalists were offended, 39 of them with physical assaults. And also, the Brazilian president himself, he's, he sent the following message: the press is not reliable, journalists are all not to be trusted, and so the press shouldn't exist. His message is that attacks of this nature have been reverberating on internet places, and these attacks are becoming more aggressive, and it's worse when it affects a female journalist. So it's with a great honor and a great respect that I pass the floor to my fellow colleague, Patrícia Mello, who was a correspondent, an international correspondent, a journalist for the Folha de São Paulo, and also the author of the book The Hate Machine on Digital Violence and Fake News. Patricia, please, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Laura. I'd like to thank the OAB represented by Felipe Santa Cruz. I'd like to thank the Arns Commission. It's an honor for me to be here with you, with Paulo Coelho, Felipe Neto, Pierpaolo Bottini, and with Laura. It's a great responsibility and honor to be here, and I thank for the opportunity. As Laura started saying, it is very impressive that for the first time Brazil has entered the red zone of freedom of expression in the world. The country is classified along Nicaragua, Philippines, and Russia places where the work of the press is considered to be very difficult. The attacks against the press in Brazil here today, most of them, the biggest offender is the President Jair Bolsonaro. There was a recent report last year, and there were 428 attacks against the press, which is more than the double of what happened in 2019. The president was responsible for 49 of the attacks. Unfortunately, the attacks against journalists have become a daily routine in Brazil. In June, for example, Jair Bolsonaro, president, sent a message to a reporter to shut up. He called journalists bastards. And a few days later, he said that a journalist should stop asking stupid questions. And when a reporter asked him about corruption, he said that he would like to punch the journalist in the face. Critiques are welcomed. We from the press, we make mistakes and we need to be accountable for our mistakes, but we are not receiving critiques. We are talking about the killing of our reputation and aggressive attacks. As mentioned by Laura and Felipe Santa Cruz, president, female journalists are the preferred target. Female journalists in Brazil have been subject to campaigns of defamation. The president's supporters attack our appearances. They call us fat, ugly. They, they persecute our family members, and they also make sexual offenses. The son of the president, Eduardo Bolsonaro, and other politicians have already insinuated more than once that, that they would have offered sex to receive information. And they said that on videos that were transmitted to millions of people on Facebook, on the internet. The result is an enormous attack. The president's supporters feel that they have a green light to attack journalists. I received messages that I'm a prostitute, that I should be raped. I received threats against my son, and also phone calls saying that they would punch me. We have already filed a lawsuit against the president, and these attacks are not restricted to the internet. The government's aggressive rhetoric has been leading to violence in the streets as well. At the end of May, a reporter from the CNN television had to be escorted by the police after being expelled by Bolsonaro supporters in a manifestation supporting the president. Supporters were saying, communist, trash, what a trash press. A journalist from the newspaper Estado de São Paulo was punched and pushed while covering a manifestation supporting the president and the closing of the Federal Supreme Court in Brasilia. Since May of the last year, most of broadcasting companies, they were not they are not sending reporters to the president's house. After those threats against journalists, media companies are considering that they are not safe to work. The most, the population is the most hindered due to this. The president makes video with his supporters and they don't face scrutiny. Media vehicles supporting president supporters making aggressions. The president of the republic and some of the ministers have been pressuring big companies to stop announcing on television and newspapers that they are considered non-patriotic. He has already approved two measures to decrease journalism budget at a time that they are facing many difficulties. The government is instrumentalizing institutions and the Ministry of Work to persecute some media broadcasters, such as the Global Television, the biggest company in Brazil. And also, there's judicial harassment. Supporters of the president use the judicial system to persecute journalists systematically. A lot of journalists are threatened by this, me included. Campaigns for information are a strategy of the government. The result is more than 500,000 dead by COVID-19. Many people who believe in the government and who believe in his disinformation campaigns, promoting fake news and promoting the ignoration of social distancing. The president has been affirming that the presidential elections of 2022 are going to be a fraud if there are no changes in the election system. It might be frightening that Brazil is living a moment, an unprecedented moment of erosion of freedom of expression. Brazil is seen to most of the world as a big democracy, as a powerful democracy. But the fact is that the democratic elected president is using disinformation campaigns and attacks against the press and against scientists in order to erode the Brazilian democracy from within, and the Brazilian democracy is facing a big danger. I thank everyone. Thank you so much, Patricia, for this first intervention. I insist we have many requests to have this debate in Portuguese, and I insist that we are having simultaneous translation to English because this debate is inserted within the UN event. But as soon as we are finished, we are going to upload the original sound in Portuguese. So, in this 47th session of the UN Human Rights Council, the special rapporteur for the freedom of expression, she stated the following based on the analysis of hundreds of situations on the world. Disinformation is not a new phenomena. What is new is how digital technology opens spaces so that fake information is disseminated and amplified by many actors due to political and ideological reasons in a never seen scale. Disinformation online brings serious consequences to democracy and human rights, as we have been seeing in election process as a response to COVID-19 and also in the intensification of attacks against minority groups in the population. In order to manifest and to talk about this subject, I pass the floor to Felipe Neto, who is very known in Brazil, a famous YouTuber with more than 40 million followers in his channels, a political activist, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and also a writer. He has many faces. So, Felipe, please, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Laura. Good morning, everyone. We have been living dark moments in Brazil today. I'm a very young person. I have 33 years of age. I didn't live through the military dictatorship in Brazil. I was born in the same year of our constitution, so I have the same age of our constitution. And I grew up hearing about the military dictatorship in a very alarming way. And also, I grew up with this fear that this could repeat itself. What I was seeing is a change of narrative, a very strong change of narrative. When young people started to listen to older people that were bringing up light discourses on the military dictatorship in Brazil. These discourses always go to a path of conservatism, and they're outlined by the majority power who are comprised of heterosexual white people and who have been commanding the West in our planet. And we are also living in a situation that because of technology of information, some small groups promoting these violent discourses and that wanted to remember that kind of violence, they have found echo, and through this echo, they managed to elect dark people in Brazil. Brazil is one of them, and also the United States, and also many other countries, as it has been happening in Europe. We have a very alarming situation. What I consider to be very important to state, aside from what has already been stated by Patrícia and everyone else, we need to talk about how the Bolsonaro movement in Brazil, and when I talk about Bolsonaro movement, I'm not talking only about the person of Jair Bolsonaro, but, but his whole group of conservatism in Brazil, how they like to invert the narrative so that they're the ones who are seen as persecuted, and they're going to tell that they're the great defenders of freedom. That's what they like to say. In fact, because they say that nothing should be censored in the internet. And due to this shallow discourse, this empty discourse, people who don't study this theme, they think they're the heroes. So we need to alert this to the whole world. We have the threat of a decree to be released by the President of the Republic wanting to prohibit that social networks may block accounts or delete some content in Brazil. And they say that this is to defend freedom. A new Nazis may have the opportunity to defend white power in Brazil. So president supporters may promote narratives that are completely away from the truth. And, and these may not have any sanction on platforms. That's what the President of the Republic wants to approve in the next weeks. And this has already been supported by some discourses as a provisional measure. This is a direct attack against democracy. All of this is fantasized as the defense of freedom. Everything in technological means must be seen as a narrative. Lay people, when they hear what the president defends, defending that what the person doesn't understand that what they want to prohibit is dark, it's criminal, it's dangerous to society. They use the example of people who are now arrested or to be arrested as an example of persecuted people. People who are persecuted because they committed crimes, and they use this as an argument of ideological persecution or political persecution. This doesn't exist. That's a complete inversion of values. So it is important the world to know that Brazil has been suffering a great threat. If this decree or provisional measure is approved, we are going to have a chaotic internet in Brazil. And social networks won't have the weapons to fight against the violence and the lies promoted by these groups. At the same time, and this is a mark of Bolsonaro's government, at the same time that they're accusing journalists of being angry at the government for having lost money, because at the mind of these people, we would receive a lot of money from previous governments. So they accused, they throw this lie, and at the same time, this current government pays journalists or false journalists that defend this government, as it was recently revealed by newspaper Jornal de São Paulo. There were payments to some journalists or fake journalists defending Jair Bolsonaro. They are receiving money to this. Therefore, there is always an inversion of values, an inversion of narratives, so that they may end up seen as the heroes and we are the ones silencing others. This is not happening in Brazil. So it is important that the whole world knows how Bolsonaro works, and we need to defeat it in 2022 or sooner. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Felipe, for your intervention. Let's see. I would like to call out the attention. We have already said this today, but Brazil has lived a long period when freedom of expression was subject to a dictatorship that happened in Brazil for 21 years. It was a time when journalists were really persecuted, arrested, and killed. We know that. Democracy is what brought back a multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic country, which is our Brazil. And it also brought back a society that desired to express itself freely after a long silence and under a new constitution. But today, now, in face of so many attacks against freedom of expression that you have already expressed here in our debate, we need to defend this achievement. And it is with this provocation that I pass the floor to Pierpaolo Bottini, who is a professor of criminal law at the University of São Paulo and also a coordinator of the Freedom of Expression Observatory of the OAB. So, Pierpaolo, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Laura. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be part of this debate about the freedom of expression in Brazil. I'd like to salute my minister, my master, a person with whom I have a great honor, and also my colleague, Felipe Santa Cruz, who gave me the opportunity to work at this subject. I'd like to salute Paulo Coelho, who I admire as a writer, as a person, also as an activist working for the freedom of expression. I'd like to salute Felipe Neto, who has been following this work for the freedom of expression in Brazil. And also I'd like to salute my friend, journalist, Patrícia Campos Mello, in the name of whom I salute every journalist to start here today citing Rui Barbosa. I love to cite Rui Barbosa. He said that a journalist is a master of first letters and a professor of democracy in action. And that's true. A journalist is exactly that. He's the holder of freedom of expression, whether you like it or not. And when you don't like it, it's when you learn how to live with it. So it's a very big satisfaction to be here on this debate. So talking about this team, talking about censorship, freedom of expression in Brazil, is a little bit of treating about the history of Brazil. If we look at the history of Brazil, we're going to see that there were many conflicts and aggressions against the freedom of expression. In Brazil, the censorship came before the press. The military dictatorship installed censorship in Brazil before the freedom of expression. So we have this sad conviviality with attacks against the freedom of expression. Anyway, currently, we have a federal constitution since 1988, as Felipe said. It's a constitution that made a pact with freedom of expression. It's a safe constitution that defends the freedom of expression, the freedom of intellectual expression and artistic expression. We have on Article 220 of our Constitution the freedom of expression in our country. No law shall contain a regulation blocking the freedom of expression. And there shall not be no political censorship, artistic or ideological censorship. So the freedom of expression in crimes against honor that have very little incidence when we are talking about political authorities, hate incitement, violence incitement. There are limits, but outside of that, the freedom of expression in Brazil is full for any kind of manifestation, every manifestation. Therefore, we have to expect a respect to the freedom of expression in Brazil. However, sadly, we see that in Brazil this is not happening. This is not clear, because if it was clear, we wouldn't be here today on the UN Human Rights Council discussing the erosion of freedom of expression in Brazil. Evidently, the freedom of expression in Brazil is not how it should be. It always brings some discomfort to public authorities, the freedom of expression in Brazil, because these public authorities, they feel disturbed by the freedom of expression. What is unacceptable is a government that organizes public policies to structurally fight against freedom of expression in Brazil as we see today. We have an institutional attack that comes in three forms: a direct attack against journalists, the use of national security law to block everyone who has a more critical stance against the government. And they publish important things regarding the government. We are talking about the political journalist and also the writer, the cultural critique. Every journalist is being subject to intervention, to police intervention. So we are living a systematic attack to everyone who who makes critiques to the government. But there's also an institutional attack against media broadcasters. They are weakening economically journalists. And at last, as you have all said, there's an institutional attack. When the President of the Republic attacks a journalist or a vehicle of the press, he creates a perverse movement, a brutal movement that affects deeply the action of journalists. Alongside what Patricia said, that's a judicial harassment against hundreds of people. And, and they're activating journalists on different parts of the country to defend themselves. So can you imagine what happens to the small journalist, to the small blogger in the countryside? This is a red flag. This points out towards a political stance against freedom of expression, and our national and international mobilization is urgent. There won't be a traditional coup d'etat in Brazil, arresting journalists for their ideological position. What is going to happen? It's a more subtle process. They're first going to open inquiries, and then they're going to archive it, and they're going to create measures to block press. And at the end, after we know it, the censorship is going to be very strongly there before we perceive this kind of movement. So we need to alert society. Felipe Santa Cruz has been doing his part. We have a letter to inform journalists. We have been recurring to the judiciary, and we need to be intransigent in the defense of freedom of expression. We need to divulge these attacks against those that defend the freedom of expression. And therefore, we need to be revolutionaries. We need to defend the law. We need to defend the constitution that asserts the right of freedom of expression. It is fundamental that we create a national movement of social society, of professors, social movements, from the right, from the left, from the center. We need to create a movement to defend, to alert about what is happening. I'd like to finish my statement here now with a phrase from Don Quixote when he said at the end, "The freedom, Sancho, is one of the greatest gifts that the heavens have gave." Everything was not in Brazil. The youth came out of their houses. They took the streets, they read manifestos, they protested in the radio, in books, using their clothes. And to all of that, we were hardly persecuted. My generation, which my dear friend, the father of Patrícia, was a member, that I honor here for his beautiful daughter. We know how things went. They were not easy. And so, when everything was night in Brazil, it's a time that we don't want anymore. Paulo Coelho, a great writer, a member of the Brazilian Academy of Letters, the most translated writer in our world. He also lived that dark night with us. So Paulo Coelho knows why we are here today, defending the freedom of expression in our country. Paulo, the floor is yours. And I'd like to call out the attention that it's not only our Paulo Coelho who is going to talk now, but it's a messenger of peace from the UN, a function that was entrusted to him by the Secretary of the United Nations in 2007. The floor is yours, Paulo. Thank you so much, Laura. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to, since I'm not a lawyer, I'd like I'd like to be the devil's advocate today, because what I saw from the conversations here, there is a victimization that I don't accept. We are not victims. Do you understand? They have the famous proverb, the word is stronger than a sword. I don't believe in that. I believe that the sword is actually stronger than the word. And we Brazilians, we cannot accept some stuff without questioning. But when Laura talks about the dark night that we went through, we were not victims. We are not victims. We have discovered a very rich form of expression. So, who are we to let this government, this kind of government, Bolsonaro, to interfere in our freedom? Our freedom is ours. We didn't receive this freedom from them. We are people who have conquered, who have achieved this freedom through sweat, blood, and tears. The father of Felipe Santa Cruz, who unfortunately disappeared, and José Carlos Dia, as I recently have known, a sequence of people being killed and arrested, people who got coward in face of that because people got arrested, got hit, and to raise your head again is not something that happens from one day to another. At the same year of Felipe Santa Cruz, I think it took me 7 years to put all of my pieces together. Well, but I put it together. The thing is, these battles, either they destroy you or make you stronger. In fact, they made me stronger. Someone said something about censorship, and I'm going to say something that may sound like a curse, but the censorship was a source of big creativity to my generation. It's not that censorship is the only source of creativity, but no one was stopped to say what they wanted due to censorship. We see Gil, Chico, who was a big, a, how to pass through censorship. There's something in Portuguese that we call jogo de cintura that we must have. And it's not a small aspirer of Stalin in the sense that when we talk about Bolsonaro, I actually believe that people go there to the palace. If they say something that he doesn't like, he removes that person. It's the same horror that Stalin made. If if people would send bad news to the North Korean dictator or Stalin, they don't do it. They only talk about positive things because if you talk about negative things, you risk of being killed. The famous idea of killing a message was born where? It exists since a long, long time. So I think that Bolsonaro only likes people who give him positive news. This reminds me of a famous story, which is the story of the king's new clothes. There were two seamsters arriving at the palace, and they said, "We're going to make you a wonderful cloth with invisible." And then they decided to walk with that cloth through the city. I think that Bolsonaro is kind of like that. What a beautiful garment. And then the king is naked. So I believe that Bolsonaro is much more weak than we imagine. We give him credit that he doesn't know, and he knows that he doesn't know. They're saying that another point that Felipe brought is that I find it dangerous what the full freedom of social networks means. We cannot have something where anything goes and it's okay. What is happening at this moment? Social communities, and per- I'm a person who participates a lot on social communities. I have Facebook, I have 50 million on Twitter, I have around 50 million followers. Unfortunately, most of them is not Brazilian, which limits me. But social communities at this moment, they are a threat to democracy. I'm very sad to state this, but but they are threatening everything. Why? Because they allow not to distinguish what is fake news and what is a true news. So we become lost because you read something. Yesterday, I read in an online portal, a serious online portal, that Japan was going to be closed. They wouldn't be holding, they wouldn't be holding the Olympics. Well, later the news was said to be untrue. So everything that goes on the internet, what occurred is that people only had the first part of the news, and they're going to think that Japan won't hold the Olympics. What is destroying the newspapers? Is it the lack of support from the government? I don't know. I'd ask myself if it's not because today we have news everywhere. Any one of us has a television with 20, 30, 40 news channels. So we become lost amid all of this. The king is dead. I don't think Bolsonaro has all this power. I hope to be right. But I think that despite the communication from the military yesterday, it's not like that. I think that the majority of the army is going to say, wait, we are a very reliable institution. And suddenly, in 3 years, the people has nothing good. He might be accommodated, but he's not dumb. So then they go there and they release a decree. Oh, he offended the honor of the army. This, in my time, was called Wearing the Hood because he talked about a little part of the army that is doing what we know. We are lost if this gets amplified, but it's not getting amplified because we are creative people. We are not people in extinction, as Bolsonaro has said. We are here resisting for a long time. We have resisted long storms and we are going to resist more. And this strengthens us. This week, something really important happened. I don't know if you noted, but and we need to emphasize it. For the first time, Bolsonaro is being associated to the word corruption. He would always say that my government is not corrupt, my son is, but I don't know, and he would escape. But now suddenly we have this corruption within the government. So coming back to what I said before, the king is dead. And now the kid comes shouting, wait, it's not like they said that there's no corruption in the government. There is corruption and it's visible. If you look well at Bolsonaro, you are not going to see a man in the greatest part of his power. You're going to see a frightened man, a man with fear, a man that attacks with this way because that's the way that he knows how to react. But Bolsonaro today is a man with fear. If I was a physician in the president's palace, I would give him tea. I would give Bolsonaro tea for him to be calmer. Because winning and losing is part of life. But to threaten, as he has been threatening, regarding the election results, that's a sign of weakness, of total weakness. So I ask, that's a signal of weakness of someone who knows that he is alone. He's going to be surrounded by people who support him. He is naked, he is shouting. When people start shouting, my friend, we know that things are bad. That guy who comes very quietly and say this and that, that's more dangerous. But Bolsonaro is actually frightened. Look at his values. Look at his eyes. Look at his skin. His skin is bad. What we can see from Bolsonaro, his facial expression, that's something that frightens. That's something from someone who has fear. He's not that powerful. If if military extremists say that kind of absurd, I ask myself, if they're going to say, you have already committed to your time here, so let's stop. That's what I had to say. But coming back to the idea of Stalin, he's killing, 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 killing. He's like the North Korean dictator. You don't have food, kill. One mouth less. Do you understand? So that's what I wanted to say. And let's go forward to our conversation because the Brazilian Association of Journalism has very well defended a synthesis, a capacity for synthesis. S- Authority is not sustained and has never been sustained. It is going to be only a matter of time.
Tá no mudo, Laura.
Laura, you're muted.
Alô? Obrigada, Paulo.
Hello, thank you so much, Paulo, for your reflection on the king's nakedness. We still have half an hour. I'm going to make a question to each one of you, and if the answers are short, we may complete it, but I ask that the answer must be short. We have like 35 minutes here still. Patricia, you were attacked very hardly through immoral attacks. The attacks were indecent, misogynistic, sexist, to say the least of what you suffered. However, behind it, there's the power, the potency of your investigation work when you started to denounce the sending of fake messages through WhatsApp. So you were attacked in your honor. But what's behind everything is the power of your investigation work. You went to court, you defended yourself, you have already won some lawsuits. Do you feel recovered? You have received several awards as well? Well, thank you so much for the question, Laura. In reality, I'd like to start saying that at the same time that we are facing a very hard time for journalists, since the end of the military dictatorship, we haven't been living through a serious situation like this. The military dictatorship was worse, but we don't want it to be like that. Female journalists are doing incredible things. And that's something that brings us a lot of pride. Joana Dalpiva from Wall, Constança Rezende from Folha. So this use of misogynistic attacks, sexist attacks, it's not something that is happening only against myself. That's how they are operating, because it's in the roots of this populist government that uses digital tools very well. They want to delegitimize the press, because the press is the only moment where we question the power. So the idea is to use these two together, campaigns of disinformation to delegitimize journalists. Having said that, when we decided to suit the president, the son of the president, and other people who have made these kinds of campaigns, the idea was not reparation. The idea was to show that this is not normal and that we cannot accept this. It's not because you were elected to a political post that you have immunity to offend a journalist, to offend anyone. So the reparation was a secondary thing. Now, if I have the illusion that this is going to stop, no, I don't think this is going to stop. This is the nature of this government. So, for example, a week later from the victory against Eduardo Bolsonaro regarding this process of moral harm, he repeated the same offenses 1 week later. That's their nature. But it must be our nature to point out that this is not going to be tolerated. This is not normal. We are going to do justice. So I think that female journalists are doing something really beautiful. They are bringing us a lot of pride. And on the other side, it is very important for us to point out that this is not
Obrigada.
normal, that we are not going to be
A
silenced.
gente tem a
Thank you so
impressão
much,
que
Patricia.
esse
Sometimes we have the
presidente
impression that the
acha que
Brazilian
ele foi
president, he thinks that he
democraticamente
was democratically elected to be a tyrant, not to be a
o
president.
cargo de presidente dele,
Because
a
the
posição dele,
president
implica
post, his
limites,
position,
implica
has
deveres.
limits, has
Você quer
duties.
agregar algum aspecto sobre isso,
Do you
Felipe?
want to add something about this, Paulo? He, the president is seeing the surveys. He's seeing the brutal decrease of popularity that he has been suffering. And this transforms him into a more dangerous animal in a short period. But he knows that he thought that he was going to be elected to be a tyrant, but he won't achieve
Obrigada,
it.
Paulo. Eu faço uma
Thank you
pergunta
so
para o
much,
Felipe Neto.
Paulo. I'd
Felipe,
like to make a
você
question to
estava
Felipe
falando, né,
Neto.
comparando
Felipe,
com
we have talked here
tempos
about,
sombrios já vividos no
we
Brasil,
have talked here
o
comparing
protagonismo, né,
the
que nós temos
obscurantism of previous
alto,
periods of Brazil and the
marcado pelos
protagonism of the
adolescentes.
youth.
Nós
As
éramos
Paulo has stated, we were not
né,
victims, we were fighters
de coisas e
of a
participantes
whole
desse
order of
movimento.
things, and we
É,
have paid
e
a
agora,
very high
hoje,
price for
Felipe, você
this.
está
But
nas
now,
redes
currently,
sociais,
Felipe,
você é uma
you are
presença
on social networks. You're a very
uma
powerful
voz nas redes
presence,
sociais,
a very powerful voice on
representando uma
social networks.
fatia da
And at the
população
same time, we
brasileira
see a
que está
sector
caindo
of the young population in Brazil that is following a very
já ouviu falar
backward
sobre
discourse.
isso,
Have you ever
já
stopped to
nos
think
últimos anos?
about this, to analyze a little bit of this phenomena? Of course, Laura, this is part of my routine every day. I have never asked for this position of highlight in the political debate because I'm a YouTuber, an entertainment YouTuber. Who follows my work on YouTube? I don't comment on politics. They see me recording videos of games, Minecraft, and children and their grandparents watch together on their living room. I s- on Twitter, I started as any kind of human in Brazil. I got embarrassed. It is impossible to look what is happening in Brazil now and not become angry. We need to collaborate in order for the Bolsonaro not to win. So when Paulo says that he's not going to pass, he's not going to win, this is a work of many people that have gathered to fight for democracy and the values that matter. And the only reason that I was raised to this position of highlight today is because of the silence of many artists and influencers, the coward silence of those who had to position themselves. And they didn't because they feared losing followers, they feared receiving critiques, and therefore they shut it up in the most important moment. So when Paulo says that at the time of the military dictatorship, we had artists united and using censorship to create, to use their creativity for great works. What we see now in Brazil, unfortunately, is a more frightening scenario. Who leads the music here in Brazil is funk, sertanejo, and the popular Brazilian movement has a lot of influence. Of course, there are still many big artists that are here with us, and I feel a big pride of having them together with us. But other sectors of the music industry, they have been omitted.
And when they didn't omit themselves, they have aligned with the president. I have never seen this on history books. I have always seen art as a form of resistance. I have never seen art being an ally of oppression. Nowadays, what we have been seeing in Brazil is this. And alongside artists and some fake journalists and presenters, we have part of the press giving voice to these people, and we have great digital communicators that are not speaking. And the silence can be as dangerous as an alliance with Bolsonaro. So the silence of these influencers is what brought me to the position that I am today. Because I don't say anything astonishing. I'm not a political YouTuber. I read Brazil as every Brazilian does. I only have a lot of followers. So if these other people were also positioning themselves, I wouldn't be here alone. We would be together. But the vast majority has chosen silence. So this is very bad because when you talk about the youth that now identifies itself with this backward system that repeats conservative speeches, we those silence are also guilty, and the historical payment is going to arrive to them. I I do my part. I ask other artists, musicians, everyone to unite against pressure and not for it. There's no other way to impact the youth than with the creativity, as Paulo has stated. So I hope with all my heart that many of these people who have been silenced, that they decide come to the side of the light and to talk against these people. Thank you so much, Felipe. Does anyone would like to comment anything? I do. Am I talking a lot? No, no, you have been talking little in Brazil. So Felipe was very clear in what he said, but I think this network of fake news has been causing an immense damage to the freedom of expression. To buy those books. What a great idea. What was it? The LGBTQ plus books in the event of Books in Rio. I was really jealous of you because I wish I had that idea. I admire it so much. But I think that the moment that we are living is very dangerous because we are not only talking about information, we are talking about boundless information where you can talk anything and people will believe you. So finally, I think that they are not that powerful. I think they are very weak. And they're weak because they're aggressive. A, a strong person is not hysterical. Thank you so much, Paulo. Now I'm going to direct a question to Pierpaolo. A lot of Paulos here today. Pierpaolo, it's the following. Paulo Coelho has cited the Brazilian Association of Press, who has been doing a very courageous job pointing out these critical things that Brazil has been living, and also going to the Supreme Court. We, as Arns Commission and the OAB, we manifest ourselves in the lawsuit. And in that lawsuit, in this specific lawsuit that I'm going to talk about, there's the subject of judicial harassment against journalists. And maybe this is not a very known reality of the great public. We deal with Patricia's case and other journalists. They're real influential professionals in Brazil, but we need to look at another type of attack over which we don't have many information. I'd like you to explain us what is judicial harassment against journalists. Thank you so much, Laura. This question is very important because at the end, the forms of attacking the freedom of expression takes many forms. The creativity of these people to attack journalists is infinite. So we perceive that since the opening of police inquiries to investigate a report, an article, it doesn't make sense because you don't open a police investigation to investigate a report, whether it violates someone or not. It doesn't make sense to ask Patricia to be part of investigation of a report. What did he mean by calling the president a genocide? He meant what he said. He's a genocide. And beside that, there's the creativity of judicial harassment. So what do you do? There was a case of Elvira Lobato, a journalist who made a report on a church. And in a certain moment, she had more than 300 lawsuits alleging crime against the honor of the institution of which people pertain to. So they felt persecuted on their honor due to that. She had to stop working as a journalist because she had to go from everywhere in Brazil in order to answer hundreds of lawsuits. She has good lawyers, she have a judicial support. So now can you imagine if this is repeated against, imagine a small blogger in a small city, how will this person defend himself? So this strategy is replicated in many situations. So the what we need is the judiciary. I know that our judiciary is complicated, but the Supreme Court and some of its justices are helping us. The Supreme Court has considered the law of press unconstitutional. The Supreme has also, in this case that Paulo Coelho cited, it has maintained the possibility of the LGBT books in Rio de Janeiro event. So the Supreme Court has been an institution to which we can recur to defend the freedom of expression in Brazil. We need to see the judiciary system as an ally, as an important piece in our fight. It is fundamental that we look at the Supreme in order to maintain the democracy in Brazil. If we don't look at the judiciary, he will be destroyed. To this space is going to be occupied by people without commitments to the freedom of expression if we don't do something to stop it. So in order to close this final round, I have a question for Paulo Coelho. As I cited a little part of a report in the beginning of our live event, she looks at the world, and now looking at the world, and due to the bad use of social networks, we see that freedom of expression is being attacked not only in Brazil, but elsewhere in the world as well. And you, Paulo, you were, despite your world success, you were also a very persecuted man by countries with fundamentalist visions. It was not only the censorship in Brazil, but abroad as well. You have faced the face of religious fundamentalism, for example. So now, in this life phase, have you been disturbed? That is, did does the movement of fundamentalism still attacks you? I'd like you to talk a little about this, please. Paulo, your audio is muted. It's not only upon me. If I, it is irrelevant what people are going to say, how they're going to offend me. Yesterday, for example, I was writing Felipe Santa Cruz saying that we need to approach this subject of military dictatorship. He didn't read it because when I was there, there were only trolls. So what do? I block and I go on. So I have been seeing, I'm sorry if I'm very clear, but I'm seeing this victimization of ourselves. We are not victims. We cannot accept the role of victims. Otherwise, we're going to give them the power to be our masters. When we give the government the power to be our executors, we are lost. So, to cite a clear example, when I went to Iran, I was invited by my editor, one of my many editors, because, but I had a bodyguard. If I die, it's okay. It's life. It's part of life to die. And what happened in Iran? Well, the guy is going to talk about whatever he wants. He's going to insult whoever he wants. And it's up to me to accept it or not. When I accept it, I give him power. And when I give him power, he's going to eliminate me. That's a truth. A truth from which we cannot escape. So you see, a man that I have a great admiration, Felipe Santa Cruz. I have a bigger admiration for every one of you here, but Felipe, he has gone through such a trauma. He got himself back together, and now he's the president of the Order of Attorneys of Brazil. So I insist, Pierpaolo, that Bolsonaro, he's not well. Just to complete, who, what changed the world regarding journalists? Was it journalists? No. It was a guy who stole the slogan and people who were hackers. One worked at the government, such as Daniel Ellsberg, who also published some papers. So these people, they were not journalists, but they y- they found the responsible journalist, and this made a lot of changes. So, Laura, in order to answer your question, I don't give anyone, and I have never given anyone power to say what I have to do and what I don't have to do. And I don't feel attacked. If I get punched or kicked, that's part of the fight. Thank you so much, Paulo. Everyone, this conversation could take hours. We are on the final minutes of the time that we have programmed. So I'm going to propose the following. I'm going to propose a final message from each one of you of 1 minute, a little more than 1 minute. And I'd like to start with our guests, Patrícia, Felipe, Pierpaolo, and Paulo Coelho. And the last 2 minutes, I'm going to deliver to José Carlos Dias and Felipe Santa Cruz. So, starting with Patrícia, your goodbye message. So, first, I'd like to thank the opportunity of being here to talk a little about how the scenario is. I would only like to add something to Paulo's statement. I agree that we must not be seen as victim, but I think that we are talking here what happened to Felipe Neto. You have suffered an investigation for saying something. That's more than an attack. That's more than a troll. That's something that they are using. They're using the Republic's tools in a way that they shouldn't in order to silence. So it is very important for us to denounce this. We have been doing this. But I agree with you and many others before us, including during the military dictatorship. We need to talk about resilience. We are going to end stronger after all this. And my message is basically this. I'd like to thank everyone and say that we are all attentive and strong, and institutions must continue to work democratically. Thank you so much, Patricia. Your last message now, Felipe Neto, please. I'd like to thank once more the space that was granted and also to reinforce everything that said up until now. We all need to be united because we are only going to win over this oppression and these attacks and making judicial harassment. And we are only going to win with union and when people are not silenced. So we must all unite to fight against this. Paulo has said a phrase that has marked me in this event, which is to die is to be part of life. So if we need to die, we shall die. Sometimes I say that I prefer to die fighting than live cowardly. So we need to all unite to fight against what is happening and what's going to happen. But yeah, we are going to win. Thank you so much, Felipe, Pierpaolo. The floor is yours. I'd like to thank you, Laura, and the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. I'd like to end citing a phrase that I don't know from whom it is. Fascism is not dead with Mussolini. We have to destroy the ideas that have originated these people. And these ideas are there. They're not only on Bolsonaro. We are talking about a part of the population that supports this behavior. So every one of us in each action field, we need to fight for freedom of expression. So Felipe Neto in his field, Paulo Coelho in his, Felipe Santa Cruz and you, Laura, I think that everyone we're all doing our part every day, and shall we continue to do this? Thank you so much for everything that you have been conquering voluntarily. Thank you so much, Pierpaolo. And now the final message from Paulo Coelho. Well, I like to use Pierpaolo's ideas to add that good ideas are not dead, but also bad ideas don't die. Not that it's not only Nazism that doesn't die. People are here to fight for something. I'd like to thank you all a lot for participating in this event, the first event in 2 years. People only ask me one thing, and I add, I don't know who said this, that the world doesn't know. That's not right. The world knows everything. Of the millions of followers that I had, every one of them that unfortunately who Bolsonaro is. Ah, you're going to talk about Bolsonaro, a Bolsonaro issue. So yeah, the good ideas, they do resist as well. And they're going to resist and win. Unfortunately, the people who chose darkness, they're going to pay for it with their own biographies. And also, can I add something else? Yes, of course, Bolsonaro has done one good thing. He destroyed the wall. The only thing that he did was that. I'm going to pass the floor to my dear President José Carlos Dias for his final message. I'm very emotional because I think it was a very happy day, this one here, that we have been sharing our emotions and the fight for freedom and democracy. We are survivors. We are not within that 500,000 dead. And if we are survivors, we need to fight to be survivors also of democracy and freedom. May God bless us. Thank you so much, José Carlos. Now, please, Felipe, your final message, our president. Thank you so much, Laura, my dear. Once again, making this brilliant organization of our work, I'd like to salute our minister, our master, José Carlos Dias, and say that if there is something that the Order of Attorneys of Brazil is proud of at this difficult moment, and adding on Paulo Coelho's, I think that the period was already worse. For 2 years, we have been living through the unanimity of stupidity. Stupidity is so arrogant that they thought that they wouldn't have opponents to fight against. So this approach with Arns Commission, the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, we fight and we start from our historical perspective. We are allied with the same allies that have always been with us. So I'd like to thank José Carlos, our panelists, Patrícia Campos Neto, Felipe Neto, to say thank you publicly in the name of lawyering, in the name of the Order of Attorneys of Brazil who defends the civil society, to say thank you to all of you, to say thank you to the statement by Paulo Coelho, which is very important to us. It is very important that leadership, that people representing the best of the Brazilian people, to say to the world that Brazil is not this. Brazil is not Jair Bolsonaro. The history of Brazil and the history of Brazilian is not this small tyrant. So I'd like to end with a phrase of Paulo Coelho and also state a concern. I'm a very practical person. I am worried about this final stage of Bolsonaro's government. When the rat has fear, he's more aggressive. The decrease in his popularity, the decrease of this wall of ignorance is going to make the, the following months very difficult. There were episodes of violence in big cities. There are episodes of indiscipline in police forces and also in the army forces. We need to be attentive because the next months are going to be decisive to Brazilian institutions. Brazilian institutions won't support the constant attacks. We need to look towards what really is interesting, and we need to overcome this sad part of our history. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'm available to everyone for events like this so we may follow in our struggle. Thank you so much, Dr. Felipe. Our four guests, I thank you all. With the words of José Carlos and our dear Felipe Santa Cruz, I'm not going to repeat. I'd like to say that I'm deeply grateful and touched by your presence, by your testimony in this event. I think that we have done a very important work to inform the international community of what we have been going through in Brazil, and I wish, as Felipe has just said, about the entities that are working in partnership with us. He has already cited the six institutions. May we all be together. We must not let anyone behind because we still have a big way forward in defense of freedom of expression and democracy in this country. Thank you so much, everyone. I thank everyone so much, the support team, everyone that made this event possible. Thank you so much. See you later, and good day or good afternoon or good evening to everyone. See you.